When we hear this melody and see this logo, we've come to expect a film of a certain quality, rich in music, character and story, and exceptional in its visuals. But that expectation is one built upon a tradition of innovation that often goes unheralded. When staff tell of Walt Disney declaring passionately, "We're not making cartoons here, we're making art," it was in full knowledge of the fact that his medium was viewed as little more than a novelty.
Remember as a kid how you made your own movies by drawing little figures on the pages of a pad?
It was in response to this that Disney had his staff constantly push against the limitations of their medium, experimenting with sound and colour, and pioneering new technical innovations, such as the use of optical printers to combine live action and animation, and Xeroxing to create large numbers of characters en masse. For me, however, the great example of such innovation is this: the Multiplane camera, or more specifically, what it was designed to achieve, to give a sense of depth and movement to the two-dimensional images that constitute the raw elements of animation. The camera was developed in order to solve a problem that had long irked Disney's animators.
How to take a painting and make it behave like a real piece of scenery under the camera. The trouble was we were photographing a flat two-dimensional background.
When Disney first entered the field, cartoons existed in a sort of flat world. And whilst the idea of depth within the frame was acknowledged, as can be seen here, it wasn't really achieved. There's an idea of scale, Gertie is reasonably in proportion with the tree, whilst the curving shoreline connects the foreground with the background, creating the illusion of perspective. But the overwhelming impression is nonetheless one of flatness. Indeed, the most popular characters in early animation took advantage of this flatness, using it as part of their visual vocabulary. Even Disney's earliest efforts. Note the way the girl lists the clearly two-dimensional hydrant. However, Disney and his staff were constant innovators, pushing against the limitations of their medium and therefore advancing its quality. Just compare these two versions of The Ugly Duckling. Produced at either end of the 30s, they're a stark demonstration of the leaps forward made in such a short period of time. In the earlier version, the story is merely a frame on which to hang a series of visual gags, and the quality of the character animation is perfectly suited for this end. Whilst there are distinct back, middle and foregrounds, the characters seem to exist atop these, not within them. Remember this flat background? This is precisely how this version was made. The characters are animated, but the background was not. The 39 version is more involved visually. There's greater interaction between the camera, the characters and the environment, creating a more sophisticated visual experience. The depth produced by the Multiplane camera creates a unique opportunity to match the potential of the story with the possibilities inherent in animation. To see the world from the point of view of a duck. As silly as that might sound, it speaks to something the great Roger Ebert once said. Animation can give us the glory of sight and experiences that are impossible in the real world. This has always been one of the great pleasures of Disney animation.
It's easier than pie.
He can fly! He can fly! He flew!
And it is something they've passed on to their descendants. The ability to create sights that no audience would have ever had any reason to expect they'd see. And all of these experiences were made possible by innovations such as the Multiplane camera. So how exactly did this thing work?
The different elements in the scene were separated according to their varying distances from the viewer. This put the moon on a plane farthest away from the camera. With our original picture broken down in this manner, it is possible to control the relative speed with which each individual part of it moves to or away from the camera.
In other words, it creates parallax, something that was not achievable before.
When our camera moves in closer on this moonlight scene, you'll notice that everything grows larger, including the moon. Now, when you walk along a country road toward the moon, it certainly doesn't grow larger like this.
The problem was this. Unlike live action, in animation, when a camera is pushed in normally, everything grows in size. In this way, the effect is closer to what would be achieved in live action with a zoom lens, where the camera remains static whilst it is the image itself that expands. The aim of the multiplane, however, was to approximate the effect of a dolly movement. For this to work, every image has to have a fixed point of reference, usually the characters, in relation to which everything else appears to move. However, animators were limited and were only able to achieve lateral movement. The multiplane camera freed them from this, so that the point of focus no longer had to be fixed, but could move freely in relation to both things around it and the camera. Nowhere is that more evident than in this sequence from Pinocchio. The high watermark for the multiplane camera, not only is there real depth to these images, but there is also an inherent integrity to the space we're moving through. By craning over the rooftops and through the village, this shot shows the viewer that the story doesn't just take place in between the edges of the frame, but in a world that is fully formed and waiting to be explored. There has often been the assumption that animation somehow lags behind live action, that it doesn't have the same effect or can't achieve the same results. But when similar sequences are put side by side, we can see that that is simply not true. The camera was only used sporadically after the 40s, with its last outing being The Little Mermaid in '89. As the decades wear on, it becomes increasingly rare to find examples of its use that matched the imaginative heights reached in the early years. Mostly it was relegated to establishing shots, the pushing openings that begin so many Disney films in the post-war years. Indeed, the lack of exciting filmmaking and technical innovation during this time was partly the result of such ambitious films as Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi. Masterpieces all, but financial disasters which forced the studio into years of fiscal damage control. With cost-cutting policies that were most clearly felt in the features. And whilst the animators continued to perfect and excel at the exquisite character animation for which they are renowned, it would be a very long time before the films regained the spirit of innovation found in the early features.
Not only how to make Belle and the Beast dance, but also change it in perspective. So as the camera drops from the ceiling down to the level of Belle and the Beast dancing, that was drawn by a human being, a mere mortal, with pencil on a piece of paper.